And I jumped up from where I was sitting because I realized as soon as she opened the door, I could smell the smoke. I realized that I had forgotten to turn off the chili. Hi, Al. Doc Martha here. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, and I have been working with kids and families who've experienced trauma for the last 20 years and in schools for about the last 13. One of the first strategies that I talk about with folks is being able to move from what is wrong with you to what has happened to you. Now, this isn't some magical thing that someone made up in a research lab somewhere. This is a natural thing that we as humans do for one another when we care about each other and when we ourselves are having a good enough day. Just last week, I was at home. I was making myself some chili. I like to make a big pot and then I can serve it up for myself for lunch during the week. Makes my life a little easier. I was making this chili, and let me just say I was making this chili from scratch. I have my onions, I have my garlic, I have my peppers, multicolored peppers, all the things. The beans did come from a can, but I can only do so much. I was making this chili and it was smelling delicious, and I did have to go to a Zoom meeting, but at that time I was making this chili and I called my mom. I was talking to my mom. We had a pleasant conversation. Hi, Mom. And then I realized I needed to get to my Zoom meeting. And so I got off the phone with my mother and I went to the Zoom meeting and closed the door behind me. And about 20 minutes later, my wife came home and I heard her come in. I heard her move through the house. And then I heard her come back towards where I was. And I said to the person in the meeting, maybe the dog is going to come in, because I could tell that she was close to where I was. Now, she knew that I was in this Zoom meeting. And so then there was a pause and I was listening and I was waiting. And then the door handle started to turn very slowly. And I said, hello, just so she would know that I was there and I heard her. And she said, because she's very kind, hi, I hate to interrupt, but is it possible that there's something on fire in the kitchen? And I jumped up from where I was sitting because I realized as soon as she opened the door, I could smell the smoke. I realized that I had forgotten to turn off the chili. So I rushed out of my Zoom meeting and I opened all the windows and doors and removed this pot from the stove, took it outside. And once everything looked pretty clear, I went back to my Zoom meeting. And I will tell you that in that couple of minutes, and in the subsequent time that followed, not once did she say to me, what's wrong with you? Why would you leave something on the stove like that? Not one time. Not because she wasn't concerned about something being left on the stove and the smoke and the fact that the dog was on the outside of that door and so maybe was breathing this smoke. She was very worried about the dog, the house. For those of you who don't know, my wife is blind. So while she could have found that thing on the stove, it might not have been safe for her to do so, which is why she came to get me. And why didn't she say to me, what's wrong with you? Because that might have been a reasonable response to smoke in the kitchen. She didn't, because she knows that I have a lot going on. I had surgery some weeks ago. She has a close family member who has been hospitalized multiple times, and so we've been driving like an hour back and forth to visit and check in and make sure things are going okay. We've been awakened early in the morning and late at night for various degrees of crisis throughout this. And so she knows that usually I'm pretty good at turning off the stove. Well, okay, let's say 99.9% of the time I turn off the stove. It did happen one other time, but that was a long time ago. Anyway, but she knows that I got a lot on my mind, and so it actually probably wasn't that big of a surprise to her that I would walk out of the room forgetting to do that, especially because there was sort of a time crunch and I had to get away quickly to my Zoom meeting. And so none of that is about trauma particularly, right? Yes, it's a stressful time, but really in general what that's about is caring, that she cares for me, and therefore she's going to assume best intentions, or she's going to pause before she tells me that I'm a bad person for leaving the stove on. I think eventually that evening she did ask what had happened that caused me to not turn off the stove. And I was able to give my explanation of being on the phone and then realizing I needed to get off the phone right away for this Zoom meeting. But even if she hadn't asked, I knew that she wasn't mad at me about it. And that goes a long way in a relationship. I think it's reasonable to expect that the people that we care about, that care about us, extend that care and concern to also judgments or non-judgments about our actions. And so you can see these kind of larger things that are happening, right? Hospitalizations and surgery and these kinds of things. But there are other things that can happen to us that cost us in ways that make it harder for us to be our best selves. Earlier that same day, I was out walking with Maite, the Rottweiler, and I ended up in a conversation with a neighbor who I've never met before. I was wearing my Teachers Deserve Better shirt, and he asked if I was a teacher, and I told him, no, I am not a teacher, but my wife is a teacher. Now, this was an elderly, non-melanated guy, and so we enter into this conversation, and he's talking about the city and the mayor and the way things are, and I'm listening along. And then he begins to tell me about the plight of the Black family in the United States, having already credentialed himself as being from somewhere in the South. And at that point, a little part of my brain started thinking other things. A little part of my brain started thinking, now, how is this conversation going to go? What is this person going to say to me? And how much energy do I want to put into this conversation? Now, I want to meet my neighbors. I want to build community. So that's why I was standing there, even though I was trying to get this walk done with Maite. But a little part of my brain was like, oh, I don't want to have to, what if this person says something terrible? Racist, sexist, ableist, I don't know. And then I'm going to have to figure out what to say. And then I have to decide, am I going to try to sort of jokingly correct that? Am I going to say nothing? It's a little bit hard for me to stay silent because I feel that if I'm silent, I am being complicit. Now, of course, this isn't the same in every situation, right? It depends on the power and privilege that's in the interaction. It depends on how I feel about the person I'm in the conversation with. But at any rate, this is a part of my brain that's using up energy trying to decide at what point I should step away from this conversation. And then he says, because a family needs a man. I just told this person that I was married to a woman. I named my wife in this conversation not 3 minutes before. And now he's telling me that the problem with people who are more melanated than he is that there are not enough men and that families need men to bring order and structure. So now a new part of my brain was saying, okay, what am I going to say to that? Shall I say, we don't have a man in our family and we have plenty of structure? Or should I say, I'm not so sure about that. In a cis-het family, it's often the female identified person who's actually holding most of the order. Like, it's often the female identified person who knows when the appointments are, who's going where at what time, how people are getting around, what we're having for dinner, what we need to buy at the store, right? There are so many ways that female identified people are holding the structure in a family that I just for a minute, I didn't hear whatever the next two sentences were that came out of his mouth. But I had a full day ahead of me. And so I said, all right, I'll talk to you later. Have a nice day. And I turned and walked away with Maite the Rottweiler. Sometimes the what has happened isn't some big, terrifying, traumatic thing that you could read about in the newspaper. Sometimes what's happened is the person in front of you has had their resources used up by these small conversations in our own minds. Sometimes what has happened is that living in the world requires a lot of these thoughts and considerations. Even as I walked away, I was like, wow, should I have said something more? Like, I may never have another conversation with that person again. And so in that way, even if he thinks that I'm some kind of a ridiculous person for saying structure isn't the provenance of male-identified people, like that could be it. That could be just our only conversation. And maybe I would have planted a little seed that what he's thinking about isn't quite as linear as he's making it out to be. There's a cost to all of these things. Like when I ask people not to refer to me as a guy when addressing a group, please don't say, hey guys, that matters to me. It costs me to ask for it because almost always I get pushback. It costs me to hear it, right? This is a microaggression. I'm not a guy. Sometimes I choose not to say anything. We were on a call a couple of weeks ago with a new potential business partner, and that person said guys 22 times in less than an hour. At the beginning of the call, I was like, okay, Martha, don't come in immediately saying, hey, please could you not use that word? So I said, I'm just not going to say anything. But then the person kept saying it over and over and over again. And at some point I was like, okay, well, I wish I had said something, but kind of as I say something now, that's going to be like weird. And maybe even they're going to say something like, well, why didn't you say something in the first place? I don't know. But all of that thinking takes energy. Even if I don't do anything with the thoughts that I've had about it, even if it's just me ruminating on what I could have, should have said. All of these things cost, but it's not exactly the same across the board. So recently, a very good friend of mine referred to my wife and I as guys, like I hope you guys are doing well, something like that. And I can honestly say I wasn't upset, I wasn't offended. Now, my friend, who is very kind, immediately recognized what they had said and apologized. But even if they hadn't, I know that this person is really trying, that this person has made an effort, that this person has in fact stopped saying that in general. Additionally, I know something about what this person is going through in their lives and how much stress that they're under in this moment. So the fact that that word slipped out, it's not a surprise, and it didn't hurt me because I was able to draw on the what has happened rather than just judge with the what's wrong with you. As you're thinking about the possible what has happened, right? Because we're not just asking people, what has happened to you? What's making you act this way? Because A, people might not be able to say in the moment. B, that's kind of personal. But as you're thinking about the what has happened, remember that for some folks, we're spending a ton of energy just surviving in the world, just living in the world, because of the way that these isms, racism, ableism, sexism, impact us. The fact of the matter is that these things impact all of us, but some people are spending more time thinking about it than other people are. And the cost of that thinking could be the what has happened. As you're moving through the world this next week, I want to encourage you to think about the possible what has happened. So the cashier who doesn't smile as you go through the line, a server in a restaurant who doesn't seem very friendly, colleagues you pass in the hallway at work. If you can consider from their point of view what they might have been through that day, I think that you'll find empathy is much easier to come by. Take care, y'all.